Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Feinberg and a young man relatively new to acting, so I hope you'll support him, Mr. Benedict Cumberbatch.
On behalf of everyone here, and especially BAFTA, thank you for doing this. We're very happy to have you. And I think just to begin with, I'm curious, do you remember the first time you acted in any capacity, even just fun around the house or something? And then was there a moment or an incident or something after which you knew that this was what you were going to do with your life?
I think anyone who's been the mother of children should really answer that question. I probably acted up when I was very, very young and too young to remember. But as far as doing stuff at school, I think my first memory was being a town crier in a weird sort of fairy tale fantasy. And I remember, and one of the reasons I remember is there was a video of it. And I came on the middle of the stage and clashed these big cymbals and sort of announced very proudly what was about to happen, or that part of the story, just sort of moving the narrative on. But when I watched it back at the video, I did that, and then I stopped in the middle of the stage whilst the other people were coming on and just turned around and looked at it instead of getting off stage. But I think my early acting memory is probably that. And I remember it being a big hall. I can't remember where it was, but it felt big and quite scary. So yeah, I think that's honestly my first memory. Although I'm often reminded of a time when I was in a nursery play and I played Joseph, and apparently, I mean, you saw a lot of clips of me getting very angry, so maybe that was a seed for it, because apparently I pushed Mary off stage because she was taking too long. And then, well, poor Mary, whoever it was, everyone laughed. I mean, it's terrible. I haven't done that to a leading lady since. Well, Kira maybe a bit in The Imitation Game, but, you know, no, I'm joking.
Well, you know, people may or may not know that you went and got a master's degree at the Professional Theatre of the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. I just wonder if you can talk about what the biggest takeaway from that was. And also, I know, you know, often actors are asked to describe their method or their technique, their approach. And I know that you have an opinion about this, which was interestingly reinforced by one of your co-stars. So I would just like to ask you about that.
I mean, I try not to go in with one specific technique, because every job is so unique in its different requirements. So there's a focus and there's an understanding and approach to work which is sort of universal. And there are givens. There are certain parameters you have to work in as an actor. Sometimes they're the hardest to maintain. Timekeeping is one of them, and I'm notoriously bad at that. And learning your lines, and I'm all right at that at times, and sometimes it can get overwhelming, with especially that clip you saw at the end with that character. He's quite vivacious, so there are good days and bad days. But yeah, I would say that it's just, I've always felt instinctively that it would limit the range of the work that you are capable of doing if you had one method that you imposed on everybody else that you're collaborating with. And so, obviously, as a student, actually, first I got my MA at Manchester. I think it's an MA at Lambda as well, but I'm not sure. It was really a postgraduate one-year course. I'm not even sure I got an MA there. I think that was more to do with Manchester, where I did 3 years of drama. And an awful lot of plays, an awful lot of acting, but an awful lot of other things around that which fed into the acting. And I think that started my kind of understanding that it's part of a total art form. It's not just something in isolation, because I was studying, I don't know, everything from sort of post-World War II American theatre to drama as therapy in prisons and probation, to writing courses, to sort of early Russian revolutionary cinema, Russian Revolution cinema. And it just gave me appreciation of context. And I think from that, it gave me an appreciation of what the duty is to kind of, and also the enjoyment of further education as an actor to further research your role. So I went into drama school with that. And of course, at Lambda, like many drama schools, there are various approaches, very much, you know, the inside out or the outside in. But for the first time, I realized after maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 years or something of playing all sorts of different roles, especially after my voice finally broke when I was about, I don't know, 22. I played a lot of girls when I was younger. I played Rosalind and Kate. Oh no, I never played Kate in Tony the Show. I played Petruchio, but who else did I play? Titania and Queen of the Fairies. That was my debut at the all-boys boarding school I went to. But I realized that I had to be a version of myself, and You can never fully escape yourself. You're always partly there. Of course you are, and you're in the limits of your own body to an extent. So it's about understanding that you can do the hatbox stuff. You can have great fun doing everything from playing crap in Crap's Last Tape, aged 22, to Willy Loman, rather, in Death of a Salesman at 17, to Rosalind, aged 15, literally 2 years before, and have fun with that. You know, really kind of diversify what you want to try and change yourself into. But drama school taught me about just being still and centered, and having a very kind of measured approach to text, to not jump the gun, to sit in the words for longer, not jump to intuition all the time, or at least if you had that first instinct, that you could then work a long way around it to come back full circle to that initial feeling of understanding a character or a moment or an objective or an obstacle to overcome. And it employed that language. So, you know, it's all this stuff you get on acting page 1. And that was really useful, just to put the brakes on and just evaluate where I was with that, my real understanding of it, and not just skim over it, which obviously I think I probably had done a lot at school.
And have you, when you've worked with various interesting
I know,
veteran
he's trying to get me to say, when I worked with Meryl Streep, first bit of name dropping of the evening, but she and I had this conversation because I was watching her bring Vi Wesson to life, and I was going, how the fuck is she doing that? She's playing grief, she's playing esophageal cancer, she's playing the effects of the cancer drugs or not the drugs, she's playing the uppers and downers that she's taking, and she's playing everything that's been boiling in her since a child, since an abused child, being an abused child. And I just saw this actress at the height of her powers being able to play every single note of her character like not even a conductor of an orchestra, but like she was literally running around and playing every instrument. And it was really phenomenal. And I thought, how the hell did you begin? What was the first in? And did you work from the outside in this one? And anyway, we had a cigarette. It was election night, and we were chatting around the balcony. I said, I've got to ask you. It's wonderful watching you work. And how do you start? Do you have a base that you always build from? And she went, what do you mean, like a specific technique? And I went, yeah. And she went, no, I think it changes all the time. And I went, oh my God, thank God to hear someone say that, because that's what I do. That's what I'd always done. And simply for the reasons that I think it keeps you able to adapt your craft, to learn from those around you. And so, yeah, there are some jobs that are much more like the method than others. I mean, I work with Katie Mitchell in the theatre, and she provides such an intense process. You don't need to have gone to acting school in order to be able to be in one of her productions. She gives you such a kind of complex, multiply led kind of focal point to hook your character on, whether it's the temperature of the room, whether it's the sound that the neighbour's dog's just made, whether it's the memory that the photograph that's not even on the set but that you've talked about in rehearsal is giving you as you look across the room to the counter to the left of the wife you're talking to, lying about the fact that you've been fired. I mean, just all this stuff, to the point that we got to first night, and it was a real shock having an audience for a start. It was just like, that happened, and I was like, why? That's not funny, because in my mind that's something very, very different. And then once that was played in, it was wonderful. You just really had not a disregard for the audience, much though she's criticised for that. It really isn't what she's about at all. She just builds a doll's house and lifts one of the walls off. And I've always loved watching her work, and thrilled to be a part of it. And I really, for the first time in my life, didn't fear judgment on the press night. I thought, to hell with it. And that's really what it all should be about anyway. You know, you should just be committing to the work and not worrying about the perception of it. You've made that compact with the director and your fellow actors, and it's about carrying that through. And it's not just about press night, it's about building to that last performance. Every day you're making new discoveries and moving it forwards within certain confines. You're a character, you've got certain tactics you can employ to overcome your obstacles, but you can't just suddenly bring in something you could do as another character. You can't just deduce the shit out of it like Sherlock if you're someone who has a little lower IQ and is not so kind of focused as that man is. And so, you know, that was extraordinary, and I took a lot from that. And the seeds of that were in drama school, but beyond that, yeah, that was the first real calling where I went, wow, I can escape into something that's so focused that I sort of become lost in my task rather than self-conscious about what the effect of what I'm doing is going to be on an audience.
And in terms of just on a day-to-day level, what do you feel brings out the best in you? Would you be somebody who responds well to a lot of rehearsal or prefers not to? Would you be somebody who, in the case of film or TV, you know, if you're asked to do many takes, is that something you appreciate, or you know, sometimes people say it maybe takes some of the spontaneity out of it? Where do you fall?
I like doing a lot of takes.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm really bad at that. I'm really bad. It doesn't mean that I do a lot of good takes. It just means I like doing a lot of takes.
Right.
But I mean, I don't know, and various rhythms come in with different characters and situations. You know, some directors have said your third's your best. First is the warm-up, second you're getting used to it, and the third is good, and then everything else you're trying to chase that third one. But I mean, on other jobs, it's the 18th sometimes. I can't remember what my record is. It's pretty heinous, whatever it is. As far as rehearsal goes, to go back to the first part of the question, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to film and television, it's a luxury, especially television. But it's sort of essential because you get to a point where you have some concrete grounding for what you're then stepping into, so you can tackle the day's work when there are going to be technical difficulties, running out of time, or light, or cameras not working, or whatever it may be. Then when you have to just hit the ground running, have that in you. And also you can play, you can have fun, you can evolve it because you know you've got that kind of bedrock of preparation. And also that you're in collaboration with everyone else you're working with. You're not on a solo flight, and that's really rewarding. And again, I suppose that comes back slightly to method. I think for me, if I'm locked off doing my own thing, and there's certain days where you have to do that. The brig scene in Star Trek, I couldn't play Scramble with Friends with Zach and Chris. I had to go. Now I got to go into my corner and think about my shit and why that's more important than their shit. I mean, no, we just, sorry. Wow, so articulate. But you know, it's that thing of just being in opposition to people. You can't. Sometimes you have to build a little bit of a cocoon of concentration. The second of the third series of Sherlock, I had this massive monologue in the wedding scene, and that was it's intercut with loads of flashbacks, but it's basically a sort of schizophrenic one-man show, and we did it for 5 days, so I really had to pull myself out of any kind of jollity, of which there was a lot. I mean, an awful lot. It was great fun. They had a lot of fun without me.
So
bastards.
when you first entered the workforce as a professional actor, what sort of a career did you envision for yourself as far as balancing it or not balancing it between theater versus television versus film? And then can you take us back to the decision that came, I think, maybe 3-4 years ago, where you were offered an opportunity to go to Broadway with a play that you'd already been a part of, and it was a very difficult decision for you, but you elected not to do that because of sort of an idea of where you wanted to take things. So
it was a very selfish decision as well, because it affected a lot of other people. I did do it 8 months before we were supposed to go, but apologies to Nancy Carroll and Adrian Scarborough and Thea Sharrock. I just wanted to mix it up all the time. I really wanted, I mean, my theatre training at LAMDA was a classical English theatre 1-year course and a postgraduate course, which I really enjoyed and got a lot out of. But you know, that was it. That was the main focus, because I thought, a little bit old-fashioned in my kind of understanding of it, I thought that what the great actors that had been ahead of me had done and inspired me to do, was the idea of starting out in the classics, then maybe a modern play or two, then a few roles in television, and then, you know, getting a film role, but keep going back to theatre. And that is what I've done. That is kind of what I've tried to do. The unhappy accident of that play being such a huge success was it came at a point where I thought, Christ, I've actually got some momentum in a medium where it's much more of a closed door. There's a very little long-term memory. It's much more immediate. Your currency's something you really have to kind of work on in film quite fast to a degree. I'm saying this in contradiction. Everything I say tonight is contradictory. I know that, but it's just, I guess that's what a personal conversation is, really. It's just a point of view. But every time I say anything, I'm thinking, but the opposite is also very true. That's the kind of, that's my head. You're getting into my head. It's great being me. So yeah, I was really lucky to have just had a few breaks, obviously with Sherlock, but also with Tinker Tailor, also with Frankenstein, and being cast in Warhorse. And that all came at the same kind of point where we were supposed to be coming here to do this Broadway production of After the Dance, which might still happen. It might be a film. We don't know. There might be some life left in it. It was a wonderful experience in London. But I felt that I'd had that experience there, and selfishly, I wanted to make some capital out of this momentum that was building, and I'm glad I did, because I got Star Trek and 12 Years a Slave and also Sage County, and yeah, it worked out well for me. But and the Fifth Estate. So I kind of I was very yeah, I took a gamble and it paid off.
Well, so that decision, as you say, led to all of these other roles that have only further raised your profile since then. And one of the byproducts of that that I want to ask you about is clearly, you know, you are now a considerably more famous person than you were at the beginning of this. And I wonder how that impacts you as an actor, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that part of what makes many actors great actors is the ability to kind of go out, observe other people behaving as they do, and channeling that. And when you become quite famous, I think that it maybe makes that
blown. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
I mean, does that make your life harder as an actor?
There are ways of remaining disguised in plain sight, as Sherlock would say. But you know, and to be honest, there are a lot of famous actors who are still doing great work. So they're obviously managing to observe something of real life, however bizarre theirs get. But yeah, it was a concern in a sense. But what I value more than that is privacy. And there are means and ways to extract yourself enough to be able to observe human nature and work through whatever medium of research or understanding of character or the human condition that it is you need to be able to get that. And surprisingly, you know, some of us do take public transport still. I've got a motorbike as well, and I drive a car sometimes. But you know, I'm not exclusive to the world of everybody else. But I know what you mean. It's now more about being conscious of this sort of thing. We're not having a private conversation. I thought we were. Shit, the cameras everywhere. But you know, that's weird. That is weird. And you know, you're constantly at the kind of mercy of people who are basically with smartphones, walking publishers. So you kind of, and being a performer, understanding what a camera is and what being observed is, I'm very highly attuned to that. So you're right, to switch that focus back so that I'm the one doing the watching is a new craft for me. But I'm managing it. Yeah. And there are still corners of the world that don't know who the hell I am. So that's always good. But there are also an incredibly supportive amount of people that recognize me but let me carry on my business. And it's fine. It's just a sort of skill, I guess, to balance. And it's interesting. I mean, I've got friends here tonight, and you know, they've seen the sort of change where, you know, basically, and one of them said, Eloise said, you know, the other night, she said, unless I'm actually in my house with you, or you're in your house and I'm with you, I don't get you, because there's always going to be someone that wants to interact, have a conversation, or what happened last night, we were in a restaurant and this screen just got pushed aside and there was a flash bulb going off in my face, and I was like, wow, that's a first. Yeah, yeah, always lock the toilet door. That's what I'm saying. I mean, you should anyway.
Yeah, that was
but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. It is weird. It's a learning process, and I'm in my infancy of it. But you know, I think some of it's helped by the fact it's happened in my mid to late 30s. So you know, there's a sort of perspective which kind of gives an ability to breathe and try and extract yourself a little bit from the madness, and say no, and just learn that, you know, you can politely decline something or just step back a little bit, but also how to engage as well. And I'm more comfortable in my own skin than I would have been had this happened 10 years ago, without a doubt. So in that way, it's a blessing. Yeah.
So I don't know the exact chronological order of when you did these things, but in the past year, we have seen you, apart from Sherlock, in Fifth Estate, Hobbit, 12 Years a Slave, August Osage County.
Third season of Sherlock.
Third season of Sherlock, and Star Trek Into Darkness. And it's just unbelievable in 1 year. You can't, clearly, it's hard to even imagine how busy you must have been. And so I wonder, you know, do you do anything specific between projects to sort of cleanse the palate in a way, or are you able to jump from one thing into something completely different relatively seamlessly?
Yeah, I formed a production company. I did a short film. That was hardly cleansing the palate. But I do. I try to. I've been really fortunate, and it's a very high-class problem to have. But it's increasingly difficult, and it's something I want to try and change in my work pattern, whereby, you know, the last sort of two. I mean, this is a bumper crop of 5 months worth of film releases coming out from about 1.5 years' work. But in those 1.5 and 2 years before, a lot of projects have dovetailed, and that's kind of that always makes me anxious because not for fear of repetition, although there is always that fear. But I always choose one of the criteria anyway for my choice of work is to have variation. You know, selfishly, just to keep myself amused and to stimulate myself in a different way. So, even though I don't know, I had a bank holiday weekend between the end of the 3rd series of Sherlock and Parade's End, and before Sherlock, I literally got off stage. How do we get this right? Yeah, I got off stage on Frankenstein. I think I had about a week before we started filming Sherlock, and I was pretty damaged after Frankenstein. Both Johnny and I were pretty beat up. So, not ideal, but then very different characters, very, very different characters, and it was really weird. I literally was picked up in a car on our last night from the National Theatre, our after party, got in a car, driven down to Stratfield-Say where we were filming. I was on set on a horse, charging with 80 other horses at sort of 8 in the morning with Spielberg going, "That was great, you want to do it again? That's great." And just going, yeah, I think I do, just sort of slightly falling off my saddle. But I mean, such a different kind of rush and experience to finishing a play to being on that kind of a set with live animals. I mean, you cannot compare the experiences. And it was like, what after the what play was that? You know. So that's the most sort of intense turnaround I think I've had. Ideally, yeah, and I think it's important. You should have, and I try now to have a shedding period of a bit of time. So I just get rid of the last one, start having some fun. Then I just sort of center and go back to neutral and find out who I am. Friends and family are very handy for that, as is travel and just isolation from the madness of it all in any shape or form. And then, yeah, start revving it up for the next one. Just slowly cooking the reading and thinking about what the challenges are going to be, speaking to people who know more about my character than I could ever possibly dream of knowing, and relying on the brilliance of the outside-in stuff, whether it be wardrobe or hair and makeup, and then obviously the collaboration all the way through that with the director in conversation, in person, and in rehearsal, hopefully, if there's time. That's the ideal that very rarely happens, but I mean, you know, it would be good. It happens every now and again, but yeah.
And particularly, I think, with you've played a number of people who were real, who are in many cases still alive, and you know, going back to Stephen Hawking right through Julian Assange and others in between. I just wonder how, from what I gather, you're a real researcher, do a lot of preparation, and but yet in some cases you seem to have met with the person, in other cases you elected not to, or you couldn't, or whatever. Just how do you approach it differently when it is somebody who is a real person, most recently Assange?
Well, there are two things, I suppose, that are immediate and very obvious, which is that there's a moral responsibility because that person in particular, his life is still very much evolving. His situation is very precarious, and there's a responsibility to not do him an injustice, which a lot of his followers and him said that I did, but I was trying very hard not to. And my correspondence with him was to try and eke from him what I could bring to, you know, work the part into something more empathetic. I wanted to meet him, not to study him and then turn him into a two-dimensional arsehole. I wanted to make him somebody who was complex and human and inspirational and extraordinary and unique, and who's done something which is profoundly important for democracy. And I believe he has, and hopefully some of that is reflected in the film. And I think people who are slightly more, you know, is partisan the right word? I mean, as in impartial is what I'm trying to say. Did elect to say that it was that, and if anything, it was slightly more biased towards his point of view. I don't think it was. I think it was fairly balanced. But I understand what I understood and understand what his beef was with it. Quite rightfully, you know, it was based on two poisonous accounts to his idea of what that story was for his experience, and to him, it was something that was, yeah, absolutely antithetical to everything he tried to achieve. You know, he was dancing on the grave of the box office flop that it became. But I'm still really proud of it as a film, and I'm really proud of my work in it. And I'd stand by it. And if I was offered the part again tomorrow, I'd do it in a heartbeat. I mean, to try and do justice to a man like that. I think he's the only Australian I've met, or I haven't met, but had conversation with or heard opinions of, that doesn't think the accent's good, or that I'm not like him. Every other Australian says I got it. But, you know, but seriously, there's a real care of duty. And when it's slightly less, I mean, that was very complex because there was a morality that was very current, and it was so politicized. Every action of being involved with it was a political statement, as much as, you know, he thought I was sort of working under the auspices of DreamWorks / the State Department, you know, as a hired gun, I really contested that in quite a full email to him. But you know, I feel strongly as an actor that you should be allowed to try and dance with these very complex subject matters, and it's tricky because most of the real people I've played are pretty extraordinary characters, whether it's Van Gogh, whether it's Stephen Hawking, whether it's Julian,
Turing now.
Alan Turing recently, and you know, I can, you know, all we do is the most light, vague interpretation or impression of these people and their true depths and brilliance. And you know, the cinematic art form in itself is something that condenses years worth of experience and moments that stretch out into boring infinity, into a eureka moment or you know, a moment of high drama. Everything about it is riddled with complexity, because especially when it's a real life, you think, well, God damn it, I know from my research and I know from talking to this person or from my reading that it didn't happen like this. And it raises a big question. It makes you go, well, why the hell are we doing anything about real people? But yet, we need some access, I think, some narrative access to understanding these extraordinary people in these extraordinary times. So I always look at it, and I know this is a massive get out, but I do always look at it as fictionalized truth. And I think most canny audiences know that. If they're going to go to something which has as rich and complex a subject matter as well, yeah, the mathematics of Turing and code breaking, or you know, astrophysics and everything that Stephen's amazing at, and Julian and computer hacking, programming / WikiLeaks and everything that he did, you expect people to come to it with a certain degree of cynicism about, well, this is a film of this, and if I really want to find out about it, it's a conversation starter. It's not a fixed point to judge everyone by. So there's that engagement, and then there is obviously the thing that these people do still exist, and often, not all of them, but obviously, but not Van Gogh, but you know, there is an audience that already understands these people through a medium, whether it's biographies or articles or documentaries. So how do you bring about something that is both new and invigorating and different, but at the same time has an echo of something that has to be a reflection of these people? So that balance between interpretation and impersonation is kind of vital. And yeah, having a really good hair and makeup team, that's always helpful. A good script is also helpful. Good director is ultimately the most helpful thing you could ever have. And I've been very blessed on that front.
Well,
on those fronts.
Having spent the last few weeks going over just about every interview you've done and all the profiles, I found that one of the adjectives
that's a long week.
No, well, it was...
Did you see your family? I mean,
no.
Do you have a family anymore?
No, not anymore after that. No. It was actually very interesting because, you know, there are certain, obviously, recurring things that you say, but also that interviewers or profilers would say. And one of the things in terms of a complimentary adjective is there's sort of a sense that you're timeless. There's something about you. You could have just as easily been dropped into a movie with Trevor Howard or, you know, Peter O'Toole or somebody as you are today. And
the blessing of having a weird face. Somewhere between an otter and something that people find vaguely attractive. Or just an otter, which is vaguely attractive.
Which is right, that's right.
Yeah, it's, I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, I've kind of grown up with this face, and it's been in the industry for 10 years, and now it's getting on these hottie lists. I just kind of go, well, it doesn't make any sense, because I was nowhere near the 1,000th hottest face when I started out. So I know a lot of it's projection, which is kind of flattering about the work, I suppose. But what I'm saying all that for is, you know, I started out and I went, yeah, no, you know, I'm not a typical beauty. So basically, I've got a long neck and a long face. That's usually period. That's usually some kind of inbreeding weirdness. So I'll run with that. I'll wear some high collars and get on a horse or two. I'm fine with that, but not all the time. Not all the time.
Not all the time.
Sometimes I'll just get a collar in a 21st century drama and turn it up, as you'll notice I did in Sherlock. So yeah, no, it's, I kind of, the other world, I mean, I had a great English teacher called Martin Tyrrell, Oscar, you remember him? And he said, it's weird, you remind me of William Blake. And I went, what? The hallucinating visionary poet of the Romantic era? And he went, yeah, well, no, it's just you're quite an old soul. And I went, oh, I kind of like that. And it kind of, an old soul. Did someone say what? As in not a new soul. An old soul, old smelly leather soul. And I kind of ran with that because I was fortunate enough to grow up in England, and you're surrounded by your heritage there, and it's a very deep, very long, very kind of old I mean, not my heritage, but like the heritage of the land and the culture. And I went to school where there were buildings that were 400 years old, and those were the new ones, you know. It was kind of inspiring, and it meant that whatever I was doing in my context, in my time, I could always see what the past had evolved into and realize that we're not all that far away from that. We really aren't. And you know, it's important to be able to recognize it and to be able to honor it and learn from it as well. And I can't remember your question.
No, that was great. That was good. No.
It's very hot in here. Okay.
Okay, so another thing that I sort of jumps out to me about your work, from Sherlock to Tinker Tailor. I mean, you've talked about with Tinker Tailor that it was a particular thrill to work with Gary Oldman as somebody who you'd really looked up to, but also sort of mask shifting, I think was the word you used, that any actor worth their salt would enjoy the opportunity to be putting on a variety of masks.
I mean, yeah, it's a gift. The idea of being a spy for an actor is kind of a gift. I mean, I was half hoping I might get tapped on the shoulder by MI5 or 6 or one of them. Well, because seriously, I mean, it would be a great double bluff that. There's a bit like Guy Burgess going around parties going, "I'm a spy," and no one believed him, and of course he was. But it's kind of, because we're so sort of, you know, showy-offy as actors, so it'd be the worst kind of subterfuge. But the point is, we shift masks. We kind of do that, you know, that's kind of what we do. It's part of our job. So the idea of playing someone in one moment, in one context, and being utterly different in the next, it's meat and drink for an actor. And to do that subtle amount of it, and also in Le Carré's brilliant world of extraordinary characters and a very real Thomas Alfredson and Hoyt created smoke and nicotine, that's the same, and alcohol, you know, just dank, grey, yellow, sort of bad, scraggly TV toned, ungraded film world that film was. I mean, you could smell it. It was very visceral, that experience of stepping back into the past. So you know, it felt that there was a contact with an emotional realism to spying, which is sort of again meat and drink, because it's more profoundly something that's recognizable, because they all have human stories. They have things to sacrifice. They all have loves or passions or prerogatives and moral compromises, and also the sheer boredom of it, the drudgery of it, the betrayal of it all. These constantly shifting sands of loyalty and understanding and diplomacy, and that's a very rich canvas for an actor to play with. So I was thrilled when I got cast in that, and with that company of actors, I mean, you'd have to have done really badly to have done a bad job, because it's just everywhere you look, you're being inspired, you know. And Gary in particular was just a joyous individual to work with, and you know, a man at the height of his game again, I think, in that film. Just incredible performance. So
we talked about films about history or about moments in history. Then, you know, here someone comes along and says Sherlock Holmes, which has probably been made into more plays more shows or films than just about anything.
Yeah, it's the most dramatized character of all fictional time, I think.
I mean, so somebody says, let's do it again. We're gonna update it for the 21st century. You know, was it immediately clear to you that this was something that was worth getting involved with, or when did it become clear to you that it would work?
Well, the sort of evolution was that I heard about it and thought, that sounds like an excuse to, you know, re-enfranchise something to make money. It could be a bit cheap and cheesy. And then I found out who was involved, and I thought, it's definitely not going to be cheap and cheesy. These guys are very good writers. I knew Stephen. My mum had done Coupling, a few episodes of that, Sarah Alexander's mum, and Mark Gatiss was a huge hero of mine as a student with League of Gentlemen. And so I knew the stable was good, and I knew their involvement in Who, and I knew what they'd done with that. And I thought, well, I've got to read it, and I read it, and I completely fell in love with it. And then I went to meet them in a flat in Holland Park. Sue Virtue's mother, Beryl Virtue. Once Sue Virtue was called Beryl Virtue's daughter, but now I think it's the other way around. She's so extraordinary. But they're both extraordinary. And Beryl is a massive titan of the industry. I'm sure she's done many of these conversations. She is a legend. And I don't think I'd ever met her before. So she came, and it was her flat. I wasn't aware of it. I knew I was meeting Sue, Mark, and Stephen, and to read for it. And think one of the scenes I did was definitely the one in the first episode where I get John to come back to the flat, and I just want him to type a text for me, and I'm sort of reposed with the steepled hands, and he's just disgusted that I've said it's urgent, it's important, can you make it? And he just comes over and basically is a secretary for me in the study in pink. And so I was doing the scene, and oh no, just before I remember Beryl coming in, and she had tea and biscuits, and I sort of turned to Sue and I went, is that Mrs. Hanson? And she went, no, that's my mother. Okay, it's not a good start, not a good start at all, okay. Forget that happened, start again. Cancel and continue, and I did. I made them laugh a bit, and it seemed to go well. And you know, I knew Mark as well as an actor. We were in Start of a 10 together, and we really got on. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and I thought, God, this could be great. I would really enjoy doing this. Just as I was getting on my scooter, I got a call from agents saying they're really keen for you to do this. And I put my helmet on. Well, I finished the conversation first, otherwise that would have been painful. And I said, Christ, this could be really exposing, and in a good way. But I thought this is a very iconic character, and whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, there's going to be a lot of focus on it, as there always is with any incarnation of the great consulting detective. So I took a bit of a deep breath, and I thought, do I want to do this? Is this the moment to do that? Because I kind of, you know, there'd been other things hovering around that I might have pursued or might have done, and I just went, no, I kind of want to carry on doing the work I'm doing, which is there, it's getting recognition, but it's, you know, it's leading to the next job, and I was fine with that. I thought, this is a really big sort of step into the limelight, and then I thought, wow, it's really good material, I'm going to have fun doing it. We did the pilot, it was great, the BBC loved it, said 1.5 hours, and then that was it.
And as far as the reach of this, I mean, I've read estimates. They initially thought maybe 2-3 million people were going to watch this. It was like it blew away from almost the beginning expectations as far as how many people cared about what you were doing. Was that very gratifying to see?
Well, we were all around at Sue and Stephen's, and we watched it. I'm trying to remember if. I don't think Martin was there at the time. I think he was doing a job, but we all watched it, and I was really aware of this immediate audience response. I don't engage with social media. I have done a Reddit, but that was it, and I really enjoyed it. But for other reasons we could talk about in a minute, that would take over my life and probably ruin it. But I was just amazed at how vocal and immediate this response was, and it was pretty good. It was all very good by and large, I think. I mean, they didn't read me any of the bad tweets, and so these tweetings and bloggings and just everything just came alive. There was and that's very rare to have a live experience with an audience when it's a television program. It was a new experience for me, and I was literally half expecting to sort of, you know, walk outside to get the train back from Kew and just and see like banks of photographers or for news reporters to be abseiling from helicopters down and go, what is it like to be in the new hit show? And thank God that moment was delayed. But it was very overwhelming in a weirdly distanced kind of way, because obviously it wasn't in person, but we were very aware of it being a bit of a hit. Yeah, we were thrilled, we still are.
You talk about some roles being exposing, then there's another kind where I guess we would have to talk about The Hobbit with Smaug, where I think that there are some actors who are resistant to the idea of mocap technology. They say, you know, what's to stop them from just sort of using CGI to replace all of us? But it sounds to me from what I've read that it was a positive experience for you, that you enjoyed it, and that you really dove into how into the process of actually being very, the whole physicality of it all. So is that correct, that it's something you actually got a kick out of?
Yeah, I mean, a huge part of what I enjoy as an actor is the craft of it, the dance with the medium that you're working in, whether it's camera or stage, and the various different requirements that involves. And we evolved a lot of the language, the visceral visual language with Paul and Steve, the first DOP on Sherlock, together, and it's a collaborative thing, and I really enjoy the technical side of what I do. I like to then, after rehearsing it and understanding it and getting something of a choreography of it, just lose myself in it and discover new things and probably fall into the camera or whatever, but just move away from doing something precise and precious. But I do have an awareness of it. I mean, that's kind of what we do. I think anyone who doesn't completely And there are, actually, no, that's rubbish. There are moments that I've had as well where the director wants you to just completely ignore what's happening with the camera and just be in isolation. Again, like Katie, just not know anything about what's happening beyond your experience of your immediate environment, that being the cutoff if it's a stage, or whatever the set is if it's a camera. And at the same time, if you're doing stuff that's a little bit more technical, a little bit more visually flary like Sherlock is, and obviously Star Trek and very much Smaug, in mocap, you kind of have to go the distance of understanding it in order not to hurt yourself, primarily, and also just to make it work, make the shot work, make the moment work, and then you can go back and step into something that's inhabited. And this was a completely new vernacular for me, and I didn't have Andy there to help me, although, as I joked, you've only done biped mammals, and now I've got to do a serpent reptile, so, I don't know how your work would translate into smaugging. But I mean, he is the king of it, he's the don of it, he's the pioneer of it, and he's the master of it, and why that man isn't just literally weighed under with Oscars is a sad, I think, truth of why it's not being recognised for what it is. It's the unloved child of cinema because it falls between SFX and animation. And yet it's such a visceral, live, performance-driven form of art, a form of extrapolated cinematic art. It's something that, green screen, I understand Ian's grumbles about that. It's hard, it's really hard, because you're continually projecting all of your performance to a ping pong ball, and there's green screen, and yet you are Gandalf. And, you're in Gandalf's costume, and you're doing Gandalf's voice, you've got Gandalf's makeup, you've got Gandalf's continuity, you've got Gandalf's lines. Well, you have the lines that you're playing of the character you're playing when you're motion capturing, but you don't have the same context. You're in a room a little bit like this, in fact, very much like this, wood panelled. You've got infrared sensors all around the roof, the kind of cornicing of the roof. You've got this grey carpet. My God, I could actually do it now. I won't. And you're just free to position yourself into something which, after you walk on set and you feel, I mean, most of you might have read me saying this before, but you feel very self-conscious because you're in an all-in-one grey suit and you've got little reflectors all over you, and your face is dotted in a sort of aboriginal pattern of white dots, which you have a cast, which in my case was taken for Khan, and then that Khan cast was used for my face, which was put on my head, holes drilled through it before it was put on my face, that is, and then these dots planted on it so that every facial movement was kind of corresponding with a coordinate, which they then mapped in, which you get a lot of in the finished film. And you feel like a complete booby, it's embarrassing. You're kind of walking on going, "Hi, everybody." I feel silly. And they're like, "Oh, Benedict, great. It's do you want a coffee? Or just sit down. We've got a chair over there. It's got your character's name on it. It's Smaug. So yeah, Peter's going to be down in a minute. So do you want a juice, or do you want to sit down and relax? I mean, we can we've done the range of motion, and that's the other thing. You do a range of motion exercise, so you kind of literally move your limbs, your arms, your head, whatever. Limbs. Your arms are limbs, you know what I mean? You move your body to get like a full expression of what you might do in the space, the volume as they call it. And then you're on set being embarrassed. And then Peter comes down, he's padding barefoot, going, "Oh, Benedict, do you want to talk about it, or do you want to just do something? I mean, it'll be, what do you want to do?" And you go, "Well, let's talk about it first, because I'm feeling a bit silly. Can I take this helmet off that has a camera in front of my face?" Yeah, do whatever you want. Cool, okay, so with this bit in the script, and then you work out the intentions and the actions and the shape of the scene and the character's motivation, just all the page one acting shit, and then you get back up to being, a fully kitted out booby. And in my case, I'd done a little bit. The thing you said about research, so I'm jumping out of that question just for a bit, because I remembered I didn't really answer that. It's a security blanket. Not all of it, very little of it ends up on screen often. And it's just to take a little bit more possession of the extraordinariness of some of the things I'm asked to do, because it's so far removed from my experience. So it just gets me a little bit more, it just gives me a little bit more courage to pretend to be something I'm so far from. And so, for example, playing a fire-breathing dragon of however many 100 feet, who's ancient, lives in a pile of gold under a mountain in a kingdom of Erebor, who breathes fire, that's not my daily routine. So I went to the reptile house at London Zoo, and I looked at lizards and Komodo dragons, and I had some fun with that. And And then I tried to work that articulation into my body so that the boys and girls at Weta would have something to base my kind of physicality on when they extrapolated it into the extraordinary finished results you see. They are the best in 48 frames in IMAX, I have to say, having seen it in both frame rates. That part of the frame rate thing is unequivocally brilliant, I think. It feels like Martin's acting with a real live and a model, or at least, you know, at least a model, if not a real dragon. I mean, it's extraordinary. The seams between the real and the special effects are just, you cannot see it with that frame rate. It's incredible. So I brought that work into this grey carpeted wooden walled room and thrashed myself about and did voice work, and I absolutely loved it. I felt like a kid again, you know. You feel free because you can only attempt to throw an imagination at that problem. You can't research that one. You can't read books about when I was a dragon, when I was a young dragon, and you know what happens when you get crazy with gold as a dragon. You know. So I kind of just I lost myself in it, and I had a really good time. Some of the awful photographs of me putting really quite terrifying faces on the internet have apparently shown, but you got to go the distance, and I loved it. I really, really loved it. And it, you know, I've done physical work before. I mean, Stephen Hawking and obviously Frankenstein as well. And all my work, I try to, you know, we often get criticised as Western actors as being head up. Sorry, you know. And even though our verbal culture is a very linguistic-based oral culture, very much about the text in England, we do some great physical work. I mean, it's, you know, the land that Simon McBurney came from, to name but one, and DV8 and all sorts of extraordinary multidisciplinary kind of theatre companies, as well as, you know, dance troupes and everything else. So yeah, I love involving that aspect of it and challenging my body as much as my head with what I do.
So that's an experience where you're working basically in a room with a, you know, a relatively small number of people, I would imagine. Then you go to
can I just interrupt? Sorry, is anyone else hot?
Yeah, I think it is.
Can we turn up the aircon, Luke? Would that be possible? Someone's waving their hands, but we're not getting a draft.
Okay, so there's that kind of an acting experience. Then there's the theater.
Yeah.
And you know, it seems almost invariably you hear actors say that no matter what the perks of or pleasures of film or TV acting may be, there's something really special about going back to the theater, and that the only thing that they say maybe sometimes, you know, you hear gripes about is that it can become, you know, perhaps a tad monotonous. But for you guys with Frankenstein, with this alternating of roles and the way you approach it, I think it was such a fascinating thing. And so just generally, theater acting, and particularly in that experience, is it something you enjoy a lot?
Very, very, very much. I mean, you know, I think the rehearsal process in theatre is probably the most kind of privileged part of the whole experience of being an actor. It's wonderful. You have that wonderful sort of suspended time when it's just a room. There's no one judging you. I mean, you're working hard because you want to please your director, but you're with a company of actors, and you're discovering each other and the world of the play, and how to, you know, bring off your part in it. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's very cloistered. It's not what obviously it in the end is about. It's obviously about sharing that work, but which is always a painful birthing process, like that thing of having the womb-like experience of safety and security, and compounding whatever the world of the play is and whatever the requirements are. It's then you've got to realize that you've got to then get on stage or get in front of a camera to perform it. And it was a joy because there were such extremely different characters, although obviously with thematic crossovers and reflections, the creator and the creation. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff that, I mean, on some nights very early in previews, there were literal lines that were crossing over. Always on my part, I hasten to add, for Johnny's sake. He was pretty DLP. But yeah, no, I love that. I really love that. And in fact, that was a complete kind of condition of doing the job. I wanted to do it only if we did both roles, both parts, because it's unique. And yeah, it's the hardest thing about theatre. It is so nourishing, like I said, because of the rehearsal room environment, but mainly because you have an immediate idea of what it is that you're doing. But the real trick, and I think, again, I hark back to, well, the Frankenstein experience, but before that with Katie at the Royal Court, the trick of believing that you're doing something for the first time is a very, very hard one to achieve. I mean, in all honesty, there are very rare moments in the third month of a run where you're not very conscious of your audience and the cough that just happened and what's going on in your belly and whether you act a little bit too soon to the performance tonight and what the hell am I going to do with the people that come see the play afterwards, and you know all these outside kind of voices, because you know it's so familiar. It's very, very hard to trick yourself into unlearning the muscle memory, and it's not like film whereby you can change your delivery. You can give a lot of choices in multiple takes on a film. So some actors don't. I like to simply because it's such a rare and an invigorating thing to be able to do, and that's why I like to mix it up, because then when you go back to film, the things that are weird about film, like the early weird unsociable hours,
no continuity. Out of order,
yeah, exactly. All those new problems are compensated by the fact that you get, and also not playing the whole character arc. Exactly, like the continuity thing is a massive thing. You have to really jump in and know exactly where you are in your character storyline. But then you can change. You can give a different, within the parameters, like I said earlier, of the tactics your character can employ to achieve his objectives through your understanding of the character and his limitations as well as his strengths or hers. You know, you can still have quite a broad canvas to shift things. You do in theatre, but it's very hard to come in and do anything more than maybe 5 or 6 very different things. And also, you don't want to throw the whole company. You can't go, guys, I know we're in the 3rd month of this, but can we just rehearse that scene where I'm a little bit worried about? And that's hard. That's really hard, because it is a job, and this is a job. What I do is a job. So you know, there are moments when it becomes like a job, and you have to balance that with the craft and the art. But you know, I love it. I'm very lucky to be able to call what I love as an art a job.
Well, before we close with this question from one of the thousands of people who submitted questions over Twitter, which you were nice enough to pick the winning question, I have to exert a little editorial privilege and throw in one more, because this was something that I know is very important to you, and I think it deserves to be talked about, which is Parade's End, which was another great performance of yours. And particularly, there's a scene where essentially you're having to bid farewell to, or say that you don't love a person who you do love, and do the honorable thing over the thing that might be easier. And I just wonder if you can take us back to that moment, because when somebody once before asked...
It's slightly... I think the scene I was referring to, if it's the same one, is the one in front of the fender. I think it's in episode 2, where he decides all the hypocrisy of this invented Department of Strategy in the civil service. All the hypocrisy where he's trying to basically massage the message by faking figures through the brilliant mathematical mind that he is and political mind that he is. He can't do it. He just keeps on saying, no, but this is the answer. And the War Office saying, no, but it can't be. You've got to make it work so that this is the answer. And he goes, well, just fuck off then. I'm going to throw myself in front of the front line, and I'm not going to, I can't function the way I functioned. And he meets up with Valentine, who is furious with him for underselling his ability and also for putting himself in harm's way, because they haven't consumed what is clearly a blatantly very strong attraction. And she knows that he might well end his life on the Western Front, and she thinks it's a waste of how he could be helping. And he has to stand up for what he believes, and it's a profound. I'm very rarely happy with what I do. There's always something I could do better. It's not really that. It's not really going, oh yeah, I got that right. It's just more, bless you. It's more who that person is in that moment. And Tom hated it. Stoppard hated it. He was like, I just feel it's too on the nose. It's just I don't like it when Christopher has to explain who he is, which is what's brilliant about the rest of the adaptation. It's so reliant on the idea that actors and directors understand subtext. I could read the book for the most amazing subtext and profound insight, you know, internal monologues, you know, literally all streams of consciousness in this modernist novel, to work their character into layers that you get a little boop, you know, kind of top mark of. And yet, this is a moment where he goes, I stand for this. This is what I believe. This is what I hold true to. This, and I love that man. I really love that character, and I loved what he had to say about what he felt England was and what he felt society and the duty you have within society, the respect of your elders and of your past as well as your present, to, you know, obey and help those above and below your station in life. And, you know, he supports McMaster, who's a self-made man who's father was a shipping clerk in somewhere, I've forgotten the line, I think it's Liverpool, I don't know. But the point is, you know, he's not against meritocracy winning. He's not about a fixed social order, but he's about wherever you are in that, at that given time, you better be good to those above and below you. And I just think they're very good principles. Yeah.
Well, the last one before we liberate you is going to come from Twitter, and this is from Naomi at Cumberbatch Web. And
I know.
And Naomi's question was, Benedict, do you have a particular motto or creed by which you try to live your life?
Well, and I'm going to paraphrase this. It's a Sousa quote, and a fan actually sent me a card with it on the front recently, and it's something like, love as though you've never been hurt, dance as though no one's watching you, sing as though no one's listening, and live as though heaven is on earth. And I just think that's great. That's about grabbing it all, enjoying it, and being profoundly lost in your experience of living on this earth.